and we concede, that digital capital market on privacy-enabled blockchains is required. So it puts Canton in a good position there. So you get privacy.
What is the role of privacy in crypto? One of the things that I struggle with, if you ask me, am I a Bitcoin maximalist? I would say no. Even though I was early, I think my biggest issue with it is that there's a lack of fungibility, which I think is problematic to get to mega scale. And then there's a lack of privacy.
I agree.
It's probably the biggest thing that will hold Bitcoin back from being ubiquitous. Where does privacy play as the world evolves, as you see it?
I think privacy plays a very fundamental role in our society. But right now, as you said, I also think that Bitcoin and most cryptocurrencies do not have enough privacy features.
Yeah.
Alrighty, cool. Nerd out with me for a little bit here, guys and gals. I'm going to be reading this document that directly confirms that the World Bank used Canton Network in Project Promissa. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, or Promissa. I don't know how to say that. We'll get into it. It's just strong evidence that the World Bank participated in this project, that the project explored tokenizing MDB promissory notes. We'll get into all that. And then also how the trial specifically used digital assets Canton blockchain. So starting off here, before we jump into the document, as always, shout out to Hypebeast ETH. He found the document and posted it over on X. I'd go outright and assume that nobody has covered this document on YouTube or on Twitter before. So this is the first of its kind, at least from what I've seen. And yet again, just goes to show how under the radar Canton has flown, because, any other project, XRP, XLM, HBAR, Quant, any other project, it doesn't matter. I just say those ones because those are the ones that are like always in the documents, and the researchers are always pulling those ones up, ISO 222, right? But if any of those projects were in a BIS document, the researchers would be all over it. Well, here we have a second document from actually, this is the third document, right? Project Genesis 1.0 and Project Genesis 2.0. If you guys didn't watch those video breakdowns, go over to my Twitter. You guys can watch the 15-minute breakdown where I read both of those Project Genesis documents from the BIS from 2021 and 2022 that heavily involved Canton, that went completely under the radar. And so here we have another document, Project Promissa. Hopefully, like I said, I'm saying that correctly. Tokenization of promissory notes. Final report, April 2025. And some things that are said in this document go on to confirm that the infrastructure, the foundation is laid, and now it's just about moving to live scale production. And that goes hand in hand with some later fundamental pieces that involved ISDA, ISA, NASDAQ, and digital asset that I'm going to read to you guys. And then also some commentary and rhetoric from this gentleman here from Lloyds Bank sitting on stage with Yuval Ruz, where he specifically says, that they're unlocking the technology that Yuval has created, and that's going to take place in the next 12 to 24 months. This, mind you, was recorded in the Digital Assets Summit in London in, I believe, December 2025. It was like the end of the year 2025, so it's within the last 6 months. And then he also specifically says that, they're in the process of being able to connect Lloyds Bank accounts to Canton Network. And then he talks about how the foundation is there. They just need to move to execution mode. And then we fast forward to a video breakdown from February 5th through the 6th, the Digital Assets Forum. And here we have again the gentleman from Lloyds Bank now sitting in 2026 talking about live production, using Canton Network. And so it just goes to show that Canton is definitely one of the foundational layers of this new digital era. All right. So let's dive into this one. We're going to read some of my highlights. And like I said, I'm not here to entertain. I'm just here to educate and show you guys like what Canton's technology has proved. That is the craziest part about this document, is that it works, right? And this document proves it. There's some huge vocabulary confirmation in this document. But like I said, again, you find any other project name in a document in the BIS with the World Bank and all these other large entities, which we're going to get into, people would freak out. But The G20 has endorsed a roadmap towards better, bigger, and more effective multilateral development banks, the G20 from back in 2024. This roadmap, supported by the heads of 10 multi-development banks, aims to reform these institutions to address regional and global challenges more effectively. The World Bank, the roadmap, among other recommendations, provides suggestions to enhance MDB's financing capacity. Now, if you guys don't know, like what the development bank is, okay, you got like the World Bank, obviously, of course, the biggest one, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking the European Investment Bank, the Islamic Development Bank. There's one called the New Development Bank. Okay. So those are all the development banks that participated in this. Okay. Independently but aligned with the roadmap goals, the BIS Innovation Hub, World Bank, and Swiss National Bank are exploring how to make the funding processes of MDBs fit for the 21st century. Today, MDBs fund their activities in various ways, including through member subscriptions and contributions, which are usually paid in cash or by paper-based promissory notes. MDBs leverage these funds by issuing bonds or other financial instruments to expand their financing capacity. However, the current manual processes associated with the life cycle events of paper-based promissory notes, such as issuance, encashments, updates, and archiving, are time-consuming, cumbersome, and require constant reconciliation. Project Promissa reimagines the management of promissory notes by digitizing financial commitments and putting them on a distributed ledger. It doesn't say multiple distributed ledgers, it says putting them on a distributed ledger, right? And that distributed ledger technology is Canton. Project Promise, and that's what I'm going to call it, Project Promise, thoroughly examine technical feasibilities and legal aspects in collaboration with central banks. Guys and gals, check this out. And that's why I'm talking about this juicy vocabulary here. So central banks participated in this as well. Ministries of finance and MDBs. The test results indicate that the proof of concept effectively addresses key pain points and provides value to all the parties involved. The benefits demonstrated by the proof of concept have motivated project participants to consider the potential operationalization of this solution. To this end, there are 3 areas that are required for further work, and then it goes into those 3 areas here. We'll get into those a little bit later. It also talks about legal requirements that must be met in order for this to fully scale. As we continue, distributed ledger technology is seen as the next major leap forward in the financial markets. It eliminates the need for constant messaging and reconciliation and enables the programming and automation of many manual processes by establishing a single source of truth. This is important right here. Actually, as a matter of fact, I'm going to highlight this because this is exactly what Canton Network provided, right? A single source of truth. This project Promise comes in, it reimagines the management of promissory notes by digitizing the notes and placing them on a distributed ledger process known as tokenization. This report summarizes the work carried out in Project Promise. An MDB is an international financial institution owned by multiple sovereign governments with a public policy mandate to support development, typically in low and middle income economies. Most MDBs either operate in a specific region or focus on specific economic sectors. Examples of MDBs include the World Bank, the African Development Bank. I already went over all those, right? So these are all the banks that participated. Project Promise transforms promissory notes through tokenization and DLT. Then right here, it gives a little infograph of the implemented solution. And you can see right here, it mentions the distributed ledger technology, right? As we continue, it mentions the project developed a proof of concept platform for tokenized promissory notes. It examines how such a platform can support the life cycle of promissory notes, the roles of the 3 relevant actors, automate manual processes, and provide a single source of truth in a distributed deployment with immutable data structures while maintaining confidentiality, which we know Canton can do. As we continue, it says, the Canton protocol is the distributed ledger technology underlying Project Promise. It comprises participant nodes, DOML smart contract language, and synchronizer nodes. So there's the confirmation right there that they use Canton, and that one distributed ledger technology that they're using is Canton. Participant nodes contain a ledger that store the state of specific promissory notes. These nodes run DOML smart contracts that define business workflows, ensuring that promissory notes are updated in accordance with use case specific rules defined for each. Additionally, DOML smart contracts define data sharing rules that provide granular control over confidentiality. The Canton protocol ensures a single source of truth by maintaining a unified data set that is synchronized across all parties involved in the promissory note. As a result, each participant accesses the same up-to-date data, eliminating discrepancies caused by fragmented or inconsistent records. Canton guarantees immutability by recording transactions in a tamper-proof manner. Once a transaction is validated and added to the ledger, any changes to the shared state require the consensus of all parties involved and the transactions that produce it, preserving the reliability and accuracy of historical data. Project Promise brought together participants from 7 countries to test the platform. Each country participated through its central bank. So this is confirmation that central banks have used Canton technology. Okay? That's huge right there. Like I said, juicy vocabulary confirmation. So we just heard Project Promise was ran on Canton protocol, and there were multiple central banks and countries that participated in this project. Finally, the MDBs were represented by ADB and 3 institutions from World Bank, IDA, and the International Financial Corporation. Legal considerations. The tokenization of promissory notes raises several legal issues that must be addressed before potentially moving Promise to production phase. However, the above listed legal aspects must be examined and resolved prior to moving to the production phase. So I wanted to find out what these legal aspects are. If we scroll all the way down here, it mentions them. It says, nonetheless, through preliminary discussions with participants from MDBs, selected central banks, and MOFs, the following legal aspects emerge as requiring further clarification. The legal status of tokenized promissory notes, the rights of holders, MDB privileges and immunities, and the permissibility and legality of tokenized promissory notes for participants, central bank roles, and platform governance. So that's all in terms of legalities that need to be constructed in order for this to move forward. But if we come back up here, it goes on to read the results. This is where it gets interesting. Project Promise thoroughly examined the desirability, technical feasibility, and legal aspects of tokenized promissory notes in the context of MDBs. The proof of concept demonstrates that tokenizing promissory notes is desirable, as it is effectively addressing key pain points and provides added value for all parties involved. Additionally, the tokenization of promissory notes is technically feasible. Look at this. It says, with no major issues identified during the testing of the platform. All right? So there's more confirmation from central banks, countries, governments, MDBs, the World Bank that Canton's technology works right there. As described in Section 6, the test shows the Promise platform meets the minimum requirements. It supports all relevant lifecycle events of promissory notes, accommodates the role of 3 key actors, and ensures confidentiality. The testing showed that the platform enables the management of tokenized promissory notes in a significantly more efficient. Is it technically feasible? Then it says, Project Promise demonstrates the technical feasibility of tokenizing promissory notes on a DLT, that's Canton protocol, that supports their full lifecycle, preserves confidentiality, and accommodates the roles of MOFs, central banks, and MDBs. Importantly, the project demonstrated that smart contracts are flexible enough to replicate various workflows, meeting country and MDB specific requirements. In the conclusion, it says, what are the next steps? Project Promise built a proof of concept platform for tokenizing promissory notes on a distributed ledger tech and tested the following key features with several central banks: single source of truth, multi-party signatures, confidentiality, and sovereignty. What are the next steps? The results demonstrate that the proof of concept is desirable. Right now, there are no major issues identified in the tokenization of promissory notes, but it is subject to further study of the legal aspects identified in the preliminary review, which I just went over. Project Promise is the first step. This is interesting to me because yet again, we see Canton with this vocabulary where they're mentioning, and this is directly from the Bank of International Settlements, that this was the first step in exploring the tokenization of promissory notes. This has motivated project participants to consider the potential operationalization of this solution. To this end, the areas in which we need to see further work are highlighted. First, Project Promise is a proof of concept, so it does confirm that. Additional function and non-functional requirements must be met to make it operational. Functional requirements would include individual access with appropriate controls, handling unexpected situations or errors, and offering ways to integrate with existing record-keeping and payment systems. Non-functional requirements include information security and availability. Second, the legal compliance aspects of tokenization on promissory notes need to further be explored in each jurisdiction. And then third, it says a different governance and operating model would need to be chosen, answering the question of who will run the platform and who will pay for it and how will it be managed. All right. So those are all my highlights from this specific document. But right down here where it goes on to talk about how this project gave the confidence for all these participants to actually move forward and turn it into an operational environment. Okay, it says here, this has motivated project participants to consider the potential operationalization of this solution. That leads me over here. Okay, so this document, I said here on this post, this report paints it very realistically. Institutions aren't waiting for infrastructure, they're already preparing to go live. 52% of firms are targeting collateral tokenization by 2026, and 80% of custodians expect to be live within the same time frame. The biggest barriers are not the technology, they are the regulatory clarity and legal frameworks, as we just saw in the document. Infrastructure is not the bottleneck. The infrastructure is already there. So if we go over to this document here, this is from the Value Exchange, ISLA, ISDA, ISA, sponsored by NASDAQ, the case for collateral tokenization. And if we come right over here, you can see the only layer one, well, I mean, Canton Network is not listed on this, but you can see digital asset listed on this platform, right? You can see digital asset alongside DTCC, Broadridge, like all these huge names, Accenture, Citi, right? Finality, BNB Paribas. And in the document, it specifically talks about how investment prioritization and the move to DLT infrastructure is the least of the issues holding back these institutions from coming on board. The biggest hurdle is still the regulatory restraints, just like what we just saw in the BIS document, right? And what I noticed down here is that it mentions their projection on when they think all of this is going to happen. The least of them said 1 year. Most of them said anywhere between 2 to 3 years. Okay, so that puts us in anywhere between the end of this year to 2027 and beyond. So just think of that in terms of how early we still are and in regards to what still needs to be, enacted in terms of legal requirements for proof of concepts like this to really truly materialize. The reason why I'm trying to show you guys this is because this is not some hype thing. I'm not saying, oh, this is going to drive huge price appreciation for Canton. I'm just showing you guys that this flew under everybody's radar, and that if this were to go into live production, this would be massive. I mean, it already is massive confirmation that Canton works, that they partner with central banks, countries, governments, large MDBs. That one within itself is huge confirmation of this project, in my personal opinion. Coming back over here, okay, because of the mention in this document of anywhere between 2 to 3 years, down here at the bottom, for the legal requirements to fully materialize and come into fruition. And then also in regards to this document where it mentions that the project participants are motivated to use this solution under the requirements and the legalities are met. Listen to what this guy says. Remember, this is from the Digital Assets Summit at the end of 2025 in London, okay, sitting on stage with Yval Ruse. And listen to what he says here. I'm going to play 3 clips back to back to back. I might talk in between, but just listen to the vocabulary that he mentions. Okay, take a second and listen to him. And by the way, this is, dang, hold on, let me get his name for you guys real quick. This is Peter Left from Lloyds Banking Group. All right, that's who you guys are listening to right now.
Maybe if we just pick from the transaction you mentioned, we use the word tokenization a lot. I personally don't like that word because it implies we're creating a new asset class. For the most part, most tokenization projects do exactly that. I think that we talk about the use of these assets as collateral, and in reality, what you really want to have is on-chain securities. You want the securities on the chain to be the same as what we have in TradFi, meaning you are actually holding the legal tender to the asset. So when we did that transaction, the treasuries that were transacted were actual US treasuries held at the DTCC. And to me, that is extremely unique because you can think about what other asset classes exist in the DTCC, and you can get even more excited to where we're going. But putting that aside, I mean, if you just think about eligible collateral globally today, roughly 10 to 15% of it gets used because it doesn't get mobilized very easily. So when you're thinking about large financial institutions, and Peter can comment on that, when you're thinking about just the opportunity to mobilize real collateral, not recreated collateral, 24/7, I think that most treasurers in those companies will say that they see at a minimum a 20% efficiency on their balance sheet. And that, when you start thinking about the implications of that, are monumental. So that's why we're very excited. This is one example of a transaction with Broadridge, for example. We're getting close to 10% of the repo market in the US. So to me, when people ask, are we there yet? It's not are we there yet, it's just how much every year.
Yeah, super exciting. And Peter, are you kind of seeing the same momentum from your perspective? What's exciting to you about what's happening right now?
Yeah, very much so. And this is a common problem for us all, actually, mobilizing collateral. And if we sort of rewind a few years back to September 22, that was a problem very close to London's heart. We had some of the old-fashioned rails got a bit gunked up, shall we say. And Yuval just mentioned sort of that collateral mobility point. And I think, I'll mention now, actually, there's a consultation was issued by the Bank of England about increasing the resilience of the gilt repo market here in the UK back on the 4th of September. I think all of you in this room know the answer to that consultation paper. It is exactly what Yuval just described. We need to create digital instruments working alongside digital transactions, working alongside digital netting agreements, so that we can start to automate those workflows. Because that consultation talks a lot about how we should think about the trade-offs between central clearing and the concentration of risk, but the level of automation that you can get in that process. But that's a lot of counterparty credit risk being concentrated in one place. It's quite useful and helpful to create the diversification of a bilateral ecosystem, but with some of the benefits of clearing. So the gilt repo market's a £1 trillion repo market, backed by £2.6 trillion of UK sovereign debt. These are big numbers, big amounts of collateral moving around. And if we can automate that, then we can have the benefit of bilateral diversified counterparty risk combined with automated margining, higher frequency margining activity. And I think that's the thing that creates the scale adoption. That's how we go from Lloyds doing an experiment with Aberdeen to use tokenized money market funds and tokenized gilts earlier in the summer to collateralize FX derivatives. That then goes from there to solve that common problem such that in 12, 24 months' time, we're unlocking the technology that Yuval's building.
Yeah.
Right. So he just finished that by saying in 12 to 24 months, we go from proof of concept to live production using the technology that Yuval is building. That's specifically what he said. And he said that at the end of 2025, right? That's huge confirmation from a gentleman from Lloyds. Now, at about 14 minutes and 25 seconds, he talks about the foundation being there and then mentions that all they need to do is move to execution mode. Listen to what he says here.
So I think we've got a common problem to solve. That's the thing that's going to bring us together. But we need a seed planted to help us rally around solving that common problem. And that's the tender from HM Treasury last week. And we can seed that digital capital market on privacy-enabled blockchains as required. So it puts Canton in a good position there. So you get privacy with an ecosystem that can support that digital gilt, or maybe one day digital bonds from the UK banks and large corporates, etc. that can be mobilized more efficiently to solve that collateral problem we talked about, back in September 22. So, I think that seed, inspired by solving that common problem of sort of improving the way the legacy systems work today, will be that catalyst. And I would also say, I often get told, the UK regulations and the legal framework don't support that yet. And I'm sorry, but basically they do. So we work on a principles-based framework here in the UK, which requires someone to interpret something. So it doesn't say you can or can't do this. It just says, these are the principles, work within the principles. Lloyds works within the principles. Lloyds is using digital assets as collateral to offset our regulatory exposure at default already with our trading customers. So the common problem's there, the seed is there, and I'm basically telling you, you can interpret the regs and law framework here in the UK so that you can participate safely. So the foundation's there. We just need to move into execution mode now.
Right. So he said the foundation's there. We just need to move into execution mode now. And before that, he specifically mentioned privacy is required for all of this, which positions Canton in one of the best positions. That's word for word what the gentleman from Lloyds said. Now, coming over here, that was from an event at the end of 2025. This event is from the beginning of February 2026. And here this gentleman is again talking up Canton. And this gentleman is directly from Lloyds. Take a second and listen.
So with tokenized deposits, we launched we're now running a node on the Canton network, and it's not in production in terms of offered to customers yet, but we've been doing pilot transactions with market counterparties. So at Christmas, we were using tokenized deposits to do delivery versus payment workflow with one of our counterparties, RCHAX. So we were using tokenized deposits to purchase tokenized gilts for this transaction. And some people will say, well, hang on, that's just delivery versus payment. We have that today. But there's only a very small subset of people have access to that today. You have to have central bank access. You have to be a direct participant in CREST, for instance. Not everyone can be. Whereas now, because I can enable tokenized deposits to work in that delivery versus payment workflow, people who don't have access to the central bank schemes can benefit from the lower risk profile of delivery versus payment. So that's been a really good step forwards for us, and hopefully that's a step of many.
So can I ask on this one, so is this only your bank's clients who have access to this product?
So that is alluding to one of the issues around the use case and how I can help engage more in stablecoins. With the tokenized deposit, I have to have that relationship. So I need to know my customer. Yeah. So while the tokenized deposit can go to lots of different wallets, I don't have to run them. They can go to lots of nodes on the network. Right? So for instance, RCHAX is a regulated market counterparty in the crypto asset sector here in the UK. They run their own validator node on Canton. They manage their own wallet. So the tokenized deposits can go to their wallet. I don't have to manage that, but I do have to know the person who owns that wallet. So I have to know that that's RCHAX. I have to know where they're registered as a business, what kind of business that they do, and then it's fine for my tokenized deposit to go there. But I can't have it travel like a stablecoin can, which is why I sort of come back to when it needs to go places I don't know. That's when we'll use stablecoins. And that's why I think it's not versus, it's when they suit.
That's right. So that's the one.
And he mentioned, okay, remember he just mentioned that's when we're going to use stablecoins. And he particularly mentioned before in this post that privacy is required, which is why Canton is ahead.
That digital capital market on privacy-enabled blockchains is required. So it puts Canton in a good position there. So you get privacy.
All of this, in my personal opinion, is about to go in the next couple of months. It's not going to be overnight, like these gentlemen and like these documents are saying, from proof of concepts to large-scale production environments relatively soon, right? It's not going to be overnight, but it is going to be a lot sooner than most people are anticipating, and it's going to happen. And when it happens, there is no turning back.